Blackwells Champion. Lady Cecily of Ravensshire had been raised to navigate the deadly intrigues of court, but when Sir Nicholas Warwick pulled her into a darkened corridor, she knew something had changed. His grip was firm but not cruel. "You must leave court, Cecily," he murmured, "if you wish to live." Chapter 1. The Serpent's Whisper. The great hall of Castle Lyonesse pulsed with a deceptive gaiety. Torches, thick as a man's arm, sputtered and hissed, casting flickering light upon the tapestries depicting scenes of ancient battles and mythical beasts. The air, thick with the scent of roasted boar, spiced wine, and the cloying sweetness of perfumed bodies, did little to mask the undercurrent of tension that rippled through the assembled nobility. Lady Cecily of Ravensshire, seated at the high table, felt it like a cold draught against her skin. She was a woman of 25 years, her beauty still striking, though the bloom of youth had been tempered by the harsh realities of court life. Her hair, the color of raven's wings, was intricately braided and adorned with pearls, a stark contrast to the pale, almost translucent quality of her skin. Her eyes, a deep, unsettling blue, held a wisdom that belied her years, a wisdom born of observation and survival. She sat beside her husband, Lord Edmund, a man twice her age, his face a roadmap of past indulgences and present discontent. He was powerful, yes, but his power was brittle, built on shifting alliances and a reputation for ruthlessness. Cecily had learned to navigate his moods, to anticipate his desires, to be the perfect consort, a jewel in his crown, silent and compliant. Tonight, however, her usual composure was frayed. The king, Henry, a man prone to unpredictable fits of rage and paranoia, had been unusually attentive to her throughout the evening. His gaze, heavy and possessive, had followed her every move, sending a shiver of unease down her spine. She had learned, long ago, that a woman's beauty was a weapon, both for her and against her, in the viper's nest of the royal court. Her mother, a woman of renowned grace and cunning, had drilled this lesson into her from a young age. Charm, but never trust. Observe, but never reveal. Survive above all else. Cecily had heeded those words, becoming a master of the subtle art of courtly maneuvering. She could deflect unwanted advances with a carefully chosen phrase, disarm suspicion with a well-placed smile, and gather information with an almost uncanny ability. But tonight, the king's attention felt different. It was not the lecherous gaze of a bored monarch, it was something darker, something that spoke of calculation and intent. She caught the eye of her cousin, Lady Annalise, seated further down the table. Annalise, with her fiery red hair and quick wit, was Cecily's closest confidant, the one person in the court she trusted implicitly. A slight, almost imperceptible nod from Annalise confirmed Cecily's fears. Something was amiss. The feast continued, the minstrels playing a lively tune that did little to lift Cecily's spirits. Lord Edmund, oblivious to her inner turmoil, was engaged in a boisterous conversation with Baron Montrose, a man known for his ambition and his shifting loyalties. Cecily excused herself, claiming a headache, and slipped away from the table, unnoticed by her husband. She sought the relative quiet of the corridor, hoping to clear her head. The stone walls, cold and damp, offered a stark contrast to the heated atmosphere of the great hall. The air here was still, heavy with the scent of centuries of history, of secrets whispered and plots hatched. She walked slowly, her silk gown rustling softly against the stone floor, her mind racing. What had she done to draw the king's ire? Had she inadvertently offended him? Or was this something more sinister? She paused before a tall, arched window, gazing out at the moonless night. The castle grounds were shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from the torches that lined the battlements. The wind howled mournfully, a sound that echoed the turmoil in her heart. Suddenly, a hand gripped her arm, pulling her into the shadows of a darkened alcove. Her heart leaped into her throat, a silent scream caught in her chest. She struggled, but the grip was firm, unrelenting. "Be still, my lady," a voice murmured, low and urgent. "It is I, Sir Nicholas Warwick." Relief washed over her, quickly followed by confusion. Sir Nicholas was a knight of renowned valor and unwavering loyalty to the king. He was a man of few words, known for his stoicism and his unwavering adherence to duty. He was also a man Cecily had always found disturbing. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, seemed to see too much, to penetrate the carefully constructed facade she presented to the world. He was not a man given to clandestine meetings. "Sir Nicholas?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What is the meaning of this?" His grip loosened, but he did not release her. He was close, too close, and she could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek. The scent of leather and steel, so different from the cloying perfumes of the court, filled her senses. "You must leave court, Cecily," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Tonight, before it is too late." Her blood ran cold. "Leave? Why? What has happened?" He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked like concern. It was gone so quickly she almost imagined it. "There are whispers," he said, his voice low and grave. "Accusations. Treason. Treason." The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was a death sentence, a stain that would forever tarnish her family's name. "Against whom?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He looked at her, his expression grim. "Against you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Cecily felt a wave of dizziness, and she swayed, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the cold stone wall. "Me?" she whispered, incredulous. "But that is impossible. I have done nothing." "It matters not," he said, his voice hard. "Innocence is no shield in this court. The king, he has been swayed. By whom, I do not know. But the order has been given. Your arrest is imminent." Her mind reeled. Arrest. Imprisonment. Torture. Execution. The images flashed before her eyes, each more terrifying than the last. "But why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You are loyal to the king." He looked away, his jaw tight. "I am loyal to what is right," he said, his voice low and strained. "And this is not right. You are innocent, Cecily." "I know it." She stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always sensed a depth to Sir Nicholas, a hidden complexity beneath his stoic exterior. But this was unexpected. This was a betrayal of his king, a risk that could cost him his life. "I do not know what to say," she stammered. "Say nothing," he said, his voice urgent. "Just go. Now. I have arranged for a horse to be waiting at the postern gate. Take the north road. To Ravensshire, your ancestral home. It is remote, secluded. You will be safe there for a time." Ravensshire. The name conjured images of a crumbling castle, surrounded by mist-covered moors, a place of solitude and forgotten memories. It was her mother's ancestral home, a place she had not visited since she was a child. "And you?" she asked, her voice filled with a sudden, unexpected concern. "What will happen to you?" He shrugged, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Do not concern yourself with me, my lady. My fate is my own. Yours is to survive." He pressed a small, heavy object into her hand. It was a signet ring, bearing the crest of his family, a snarling wolf. "This will identify you to my contacts," he said. "They will help you. Trust no one else." She looked at the ring, then back at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "I thank you, Sir Nicholas," she whispered. "I do not understand why you are doing this, but I thank you." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Go now, Cecily," he said, his voice firm. "And may God be with you." He released her, and she stumbled back, her mind still reeling. She looked at him for a moment longer, a question burning in her eyes. But he turned away, disappearing back into the shadows of the corridor, leaving her alone with the chilling weight of his words and the terrifying uncertainty of her future. The distant sounds of the feast, once a backdrop to her carefully constructed world, now seemed like a mocking echo of a life she might never know again. Chapter 2. Flight in the Moonless Night. The postern gate, a small, iron-bound door set into the thick stone wall of the castle, was shrouded in darkness. A lone figure, cloaked and hooded, waited impatiently, stamping his feet against the cold. As Cecily approached, her heart hammering against her ribs, he turned, revealing a face weathered by the elements and marked by a network of fine scars. He was a groom, judging by his rough clothing and the smell of horses that clung to him. He gave a curt nod, recognizing the signet ring she held out. "My lady," he said, his voice low and gruff. "The horse is ready." He gestured towards a magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming faintly in the starlight that pierced through the clouds. The horse was saddled and bridled, a heavy pack strapped to its back. It was a warhorse, built for speed and endurance, not the dainty palfrey a lady would normally ride. This was no leisurely journey, it was an escape. Cecily took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She had never ridden astride before, always preferring the side saddle deemed proper for a woman of her station. But tonight, there was no room for propriety. Survival was all that mattered. With the groom's help, she mounted the stallion, her silk gown bunching awkwardly around her legs. The horse shifted beneath her, sensing her nervousness, and she gripped the reins tightly, her knuckles white. "The North Road, my lady," the groom said, handing her a small leather pouch. "This contains food and coin. Ride hard. Do not stop for anyone." He opened the gate, the hinges groaning in protest, a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness of the night. Cecily looked back at the castle, its towering silhouette looming against the sky. It had been her home, her prison, her stage. Now it was a symbol of everything she was leaving behind. With a final, lingering glance, she spurred the horse forward, urging it into a gallop. The cold night air whipped at her face, stinging her eyes and bringing tears to her cheeks. The wind howled in her ears, drowning out the sound of her own ragged breathing. She rode as if pursued by demons, the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves against the uneven ground a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night. The North Road was little more than a rough track, winding its way through dense forests and across windswept moors. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional glimpse of stars through the swirling clouds. Cecily had no map, no guide, only the groom's instructions and the desperate hope that she was heading in the right direction. She rode for hours, her body aching, her mind numb with fear. The initial adrenaline rush had faded, leaving her with a bone-deep exhaustion. She had to fight to stay awake, to keep her grip on the reins, to keep the horse moving forward. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the hooting of owls, the snapping of twigs. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every noise a potential pursuer. She imagined the king's men, their faces grim and determined, hot on her trail. She imagined the cold steel of a blade, the suffocating darkness of a dungeon. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, she reached a small, swift-flowing river. The horse, its flanks lathered with sweat, drank deeply, its breath coming in ragged gasps. Cecily slid from the saddle, her legs stiff and trembling. She splashed water on her face, the icy shock momentarily reviving her. She knew she couldn't rest for long. Every moment she delayed increased the risk of capture. But she needed to eat, to regain some strength. She opened the leather pouch the groom had given her, finding a loaf of hard bread, a chunk of cheese, and a dried apple. She ate slowly, forcing herself to swallow each mouthful, her stomach churning with anxiety. As she ate, she looked around, taking in her surroundings. The riverbank was lined with willow trees, their branches drooping low over the water. The air was fresh and clean, scented with the earthy fragrance of damp soil and wildflowers. It was a scene of serene beauty, a stark contrast to the terror that gripped her heart. She thought of Sir Nicholas, of his unexpected act of kindness, of the risk he had taken to save her. She wondered what had motivated him. Loyalty to the king was his sworn duty, yet he had betrayed that loyalty to help her, a woman he barely knew. What was the meaning of that? She turned the signet ring around and around in her hand. She finished her meager meal, remounted the horse, and continued her journey. The dawn brought with it a renewed sense of urgency. She had to reach Ravensshire to find sanctuary before it was too late. The landscape began to change, the dense forests giving way to rolling hills and open moorland. The air grew colder, the wind sharper, carrying with it the scent of the sea. In the distance, she saw a dark, imposing shape looming against the horizon. It was Ravensshire, her ancestral home, a place of forgotten memories and uncertain refuge. As she approached the castle, she saw that it was even more dilapidated than she remembered. The walls were crumbling, the towers were broken, the courtyard was overgrown with weeds. It looked more like a ruin than a fortress. A sense of despair washed over her. Was this the sanctuary she had been hoping for? Could this crumbling pile of stones offer her any protection? She rode through the broken gate, her heart sinking with each step. The courtyard was deserted, the silence broken only by the cawing of crows. She dismounted, her legs almost giving way beneath her. She stood there for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the desolate scene, her hope dwindling with each passing second. She was alone, utterly alone, in a place that felt more like a tomb than a home. The weight of her situation pressed down on her, crushing her spirit. She had escaped the king's wrath. But for what? To die alone in this forgotten corner of the world? A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a tear of despair, of loneliness, of utter exhaustion. She sank to her knees, her body shaking with silent sobs. The moonless night had given way to a bleak dawn, and Cecily of Ravensshire, once a lady of the court, was now a fugitive, alone and afraid, with nothing but a crumbling castle and a heavy heart to call her own. Chapter 3. Sanctuary of Stone and Silence. The silence of Ravensshire was not the peaceful quiet of a tranquil haven, but the heavy, suffocating silence of abandonment. It pressed down on Cecily, amplifying her isolation. The wind, whistling through the broken battlements, seemed to carry whispers of past glories and present sorrows. The stones themselves, weathered and worn, seemed to exude a sense of melancholy, a testament to the passage of time and the inevitability of decay. She had spent the previous night huddled in the least damaged of the castle's chambers, a small, sparsely furnished room that had once been a lady's solar. The fire she had managed to build in the crumbling hearth had done little to ward off the chill, both physical and emotional. Sleep had eluded her, her mind tormented by images of the court, of the king's menacing gaze, of Sir Nicholas's cryptic warning. As the pale dawn light filtered through the narrow windows, she rose, her body stiff and aching, her spirit heavy with despair. She had to find a way to survive, to make this desolate place a refuge, not a tomb. She had to find some semblance of hope amidst the ruins. She began by exploring the castle, her footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Most of the rooms were uninhabitable, their roofs collapsed, their floors covered in debris. But she found a few that were relatively intact, including a small kitchen, a dusty library, and a chapel, its stained glass windows miraculously unbroken. The kitchen, though grimy and neglected, still contained a large stone hearth, a rusty cauldron, and a few battered pots and pans. Cecily set about cleaning it, scrubbing the surfaces with water drawn from a well in the courtyard. The physical labor, though tiring, was a welcome distraction from her anxieties. It gave her a sense of purpose, a small measure of control in a situation that felt utterly overwhelming. The library, once a repository of knowledge and learning, was now a scene of dusty decay. Many of the books had been damaged by dampness, their pages crumbling and illegible. But Cecily found a few that were still intact, their leather covers worn but their contents preserved. She carefully placed them on a shelf, a flicker of hope rekindled in her heart. Perhaps, amidst these forgotten words, she could find some solace, some guidance, some connection to the world she had left behind. The chapel, with its soaring arches and its vibrant stained glass windows depicting scenes from the Bible, was the most intact part of the castle. The air here was still and cool, scented with the faint aroma of incense, a lingering reminder of past devotions. Cecily knelt before the altar, her hands clasped in prayer. She had never been a particularly pious woman, her faith more a matter of social convention than deep conviction. But now, in this moment of utter vulnerability, she felt a desperate need for something to believe in, something to cling to. She prayed for strength, for courage, for guidance. She prayed for her family, for her friends, for Sir Nicholas. She prayed for a way out of this darkness, a path to a brighter future. As she prayed, a sense of calm, fragile but real, began to settle over her. The silence of the chapel, unlike the silence of the rest of the castle, felt comforting, protective. It was a silence that allowed her to hear her own inner voice, to connect with a part of herself that had been buried beneath the layers of courtly artifice. She spent the rest of the day exploring the castle grounds, discovering a neglected herb garden, a crumbling stable, and a walled orchard, its fruit trees overgrown but still bearing a few withered apples. She began to make plans, to envision a way to make this place not just habitable, but a home. She would clear the debris, repair the rooms, cultivate the garden, tend to the orchard. She would learn to live off the land, to be self-sufficient, to rely on her own resourcefulness. She would transform this ruin into a sanctuary, a place where she could heal, where she could rediscover herself, where she could wait for whatever fate had in store for her. As dusk settled, she lit a fire in the kitchen hearth, the flames casting a warm glow over the stone walls. She cooked a simple meal of dried meat and herbs, the aroma filling the small room with a sense of domesticity. It was a far cry from the lavish feasts of the court, but it was food, and it was warmth, and it was a symbol of her determination to survive. As she ate, she heard a noise outside, the sound of approaching footsteps. Her heart leaped into her throat. Was it the king's men? Had they found her? She grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the hearth, her hand trembling. She stood in the shadows, listening intently, her body tense and ready to defend herself. The footsteps grew closer, and then a voice called out, a woman's voice, rough but not unkind. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Cecily hesitated, her fear battling with a flicker of hope. Cautiously, she opened the door, the poker held high. Standing in the twilight was an elderly woman, her face wrinkled and weathered, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She wore a simple woolen gown, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and a sturdy pair of boots. She carried a basket filled with what looked like herbs and roots. "Who are you?" Cecily asked, her voice still wary. The woman smiled, a surprisingly warm smile that softened her features. "My name is Alara," she said. "I live in the village, just beyond the woods. I saw the smoke from your fire. I thought someone might be here." She looked at Cecily, her gaze taking in her fine but travel-stained gown, her pale face, her wary expression. "You are not from these parts, are you, my lady?" she asked gently. Cecily hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger. But there was something in Alara's eyes, a kindness, a wisdom, that eased her fears. "No," she said, lowering the poker. "I am Lady Cecily of Ravensshire. This was my family's home." Alara's eyes widened slightly. "Ravensshire?" she said, her voice filled with surprise. "But I thought the castle was abandoned. No one has lived here for years." "It was," Cecily said, her voice heavy with sadness. "But now I am here, alone." Alara looked at her, her expression filled with compassion. "Alone," she repeated softly. "That is a hard thing, my lady, especially in a place like this." She stepped closer, her gaze searching Cecily's face. "Come," she said, her voice gentle. "Let us talk. You look like you could use a friend." Cecily, her heart filled with a sudden, unexpected surge of hope, nodded. She had found sanctuary, not just in the stone and silence of Ravensshire, but in the unexpected kindness of a stranger. The night was still dark, but a faint glimmer of light had appeared on the horizon. The poker, no longer needed, clattered to the floor, the sound echoing the release of tension that had been building within her since that fateful night at court. Chapter 4. The Night of Whispering Shadows. Alara proved to be more than just a friendly villager. She was a wellspring of knowledge about Raven's Hire and the surrounding lands. She knew the history of the castle, the stories of its past inhabitants, the secrets hidden within its crumbling walls. She also possessed a deep understanding of herbs and remedies, a skill honed over years of living close to nature. She became Cecily's guide, her teacher, her confidant, helping her navigate the challenges of her new life. Over the next few weeks, Cecily, with Alara's help, began to transform Raven's Hire. They cleared the debris from the main hall, repaired the roof of the kitchen, and cultivated the herb garden, planting seeds that Alara had brought from the village. Cecily learned to milk the scrawny goat Alara had gifted her, to churn butter, to bake bread in the ancient oven. She learned to identify edible plants, to track small animals, to survive off the land. The physical labor was demanding, but it was also therapeutic. It helped Cecily to forget, at least for a few hours each day, the fear and uncertainty that gnawed at her. It gave her a sense of accomplishment, a feeling of being connected to something tangible, something real. Alara also shared stories of the surrounding villages, of the people who lived there, of their customs and traditions. Cecily learned that the region was fiercely independent, its inhabitants wary of outsiders, particularly those associated with the royal court. They were a proud people, fiercely loyal to their own, bound together by a shared history of hardship and resilience. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the kitchen, sharing a simple meal of roasted rabbit and root vegetables, Alara spoke of the legend of the Night of Whispering Shadows, a figure said to haunt the nearby forests. They say he was a knight of great valor, Alara said, her voice low and hushed, loyal to the old king, the father of the current one. But he was betrayed, accused of treason, just like you, my lady. Cecily felt a chill run down her spine. The story resonated with her own, a chilling echo of her own predicament. What happened to him? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Some say he was killed, Alara said, his body thrown into the Whispering Caves, a network of caverns deep within the forest. Others say he escaped, that he still roams the woods, a protector of the innocent, a guardian of the lost. A ghost? Cecily asked, a hint of skepticism in her voice. Alara shrugged. Perhaps. Or perhaps just a man, driven by a thirst for justice, living in the shadows, waiting for his chance to reclaim his honor. The story lingered in Cecily's mind, a haunting reminder of the precariousness of her own situation. She wondered if she, too, would become a legend, a whisper in the wind, a figure of tragedy and defiance. Several days later, as Cecily was working in the herb garden, she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed a trowel, her only weapon, and stood ready to defend herself. A rider emerged from the trees, his figure cloaked and hooded. He rode a magnificent black stallion, the same breed as the one she had ridden to escape the court. Her breath caught in her chest. Could it be? The rider dismounted, and as he lowered his hood, Cecily gasped. It was Sir Nicholas Warwick. He looked different than she remembered. He was thinner, his face gaunt and etched with lines of fatigue. His clothes were travel-stained, his armor dull and scratched. But his eyes, those storm cloud eyes, still held the same intensity, the same unsettling depth. Sir Nicholas, she breathed, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. What are you doing here? He walked towards her, his gaze searching hers. I came to see if you were safe, he said, his voice low and rough. Safe? She said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. I am a fugitive, living in a ruin, hiding from the king's justice. Is that what you call safe? He flinched, as if her words had struck him. I know it is not ideal, my lady, he said. But it is better than the alternative. And what about you? She asked. You betrayed your king to help me. What is your fate now? He shrugged, a familiar gesture that spoke of a burden he carried with stoic resignation. My fate is my own concern, he said. I am no longer a knight of the realm. I am an outlaw just like you. He had been stripped of his title, his lands, his honor. He was a fugitive, just like her, his life forfeit if he were caught. He had sacrificed everything to save her, and now he was here, in this desolate place, sharing her exile.
Why?
She asked, her voice filled with a desperate need to understand. Why did you do it? You owed me nothing. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He hesitated for a moment, as if struggling with his own inner demons. I told you, he said, his voice low and strained. I believe in justice. And what was done to you, it was not just. But there must be more, she insisted. There must be something else. He turned away, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. There are things in my past, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Things that haunt me. I have made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I have seen the darkness that lies at the heart of power, the corruption that festers in the halls of the mighty. I could not stand by and watch another innocent life be destroyed. His words resonated with Cecily, echoing the disillusionment she had felt in the court, the sense of betrayal that had driven her to flee. She saw in him a kindred spirit, a fellow traveler on a path of exile and uncertainty. So, what now? She asked, her voice softer now, the bitterness replaced by a sense of shared vulnerability. He turned back to her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Now, he said, we survive. Together. The word, together, hung in the air between them, a fragile promise in a world of shadows and uncertainty. The trowel slipped from Cecily's grasp and fell to the ground, unnoticed, as a new, more complicated chapter began to unfold in the sanctuary of stone and silence. Chapter 5. Scars of the Past, Echoes of the Heart. The arrival of Sir Nicholas, or rather, Nicholas, as he insisted Cecily call him, now changed the rhythm of life at Ravensshire. He was a man of action, of practical skills, and he threw himself into the task of making the castle habitable with a quiet intensity that both impressed and intimidated Cecily. He repaired the roof of the main hall, strengthened the crumbling walls, and cleared the courtyard of debris. He hunted for game, providing a welcome addition to their meager diet. He was a skilled swordsman, and he began to train Cecily in the art of self-defense, teaching her to wield a dagger and a short sword. Cecily, in turn, shared her knowledge of herbs and remedies with him, teaching him to identify medicinal plants and to prepare poultices and salves. They worked side by side, their shared labor forging a bond of mutual respect and understanding. But there were also silences between them, long stretches of unspoken words and unanswered questions. Nicholas was a man of deep reserve, his past shrouded in mystery, his emotions carefully guarded. He rarely spoke of his life before Ravensshire, and Cecily, though curious, respected his privacy. She learned, in snippets and fragments, that he had been a highly decorated knight, a veteran of many battles, a trusted advisor to the king. He had been married, once, to a woman he had loved deeply, but she had died in childbirth, along with their child. The loss had left him scarred, both physically and emotionally. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the main hall, the flames casting flickering shadows on the stone walls, Cecily dared to broach the subject that had been haunting her. Nicholas, she said softly, the night you helped me escape you said there were accusations against me. Treason. Do you know what those accusations were? He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the flames. There were rumors, he said, his voice low and strained, that you were plotting with the king's enemies, that you were passing on secrets, that you were involved with another man. Cecily felt a surge of anger, a burning sense of injustice. Lies, she said, her voice trembling. All of it lies. I was loyal to the king, to my husband. I would never betray them. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and understanding. I know that, Cecily, he said. But the king is a suspicious man, easily swayed by whispers and innuendo. And there are those in the court who would benefit from your downfall. But who? She asked, her voice desperate. Who would spread such lies?
He shook his head. I do not know, he said.
But I suspect it is someone close to the king, someone with power and influence. Someone who sees you as a threat. The thought chilled her. She had made enemies in the court. That was inevitable. But she had never imagined that anyone would go to such lengths to destroy her. And the other man? She asked, her voice hesitant. Who were they saying I was involved with? He looked away, his jaw tight.
It was never specified, he said.
Just rumors. Whispers in the dark. She sensed that he was holding something back, that there was more to the story than he was telling her. But she didn't press him. She knew that he would reveal it in his own time, when he was ready. As the weeks turned into months, Cecily and Nicholas grew closer. They shared their fears, their hopes, their dreams. They learned to rely on each other, to trust each other, to find comfort in each other's presence. One evening, as they were returning from a hunting trip in the forest, they stopped by a small, secluded lake. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water. The air was still and peaceful, the only sound the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. Nicholas, who rarely showed emotion, seemed unusually relaxed, his guard down. He sat on a fallen log, gazing out at the lake, his expression pensive. Cecily sat beside him, her shoulder brushing against his. She felt a strange warmth spread through her, a feeling she had not experienced in years. It was not the passionate, all-consuming love she had once felt for a young poet, long before her arranged marriage, but something deeper, something more profound. It was a feeling of connection, of belonging, of shared vulnerability. This reminds me of a place I knew, long ago, Nicholas said, his voice soft and wistful. A place of peace, of beauty, of love. He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. I never thought I would find such a place again, he said. After I lost her. He spoke of his wife, of his grief, of the guilt he had carried for years, blaming himself for her death. He spoke of the darkness that had enveloped him, the emptiness that had consumed him. Cecily listened, her heart aching for him. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. His hand was rough and calloused, but it was also warm and strong. You are not to blame, Nicholas, she said softly. It was not your fault. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. Thank you, Cecily, he said, for everything. He leaned closer, his gaze lingering on her lips. She felt a flutter of anticipation, a sense of inevitability. He cupped her face and gently kissed her. It was a tentative kiss, a gentle exploration, a hesitant reaching out. But it was also a kiss filled with a depth of emotion that surprised them both. It was a kiss that spoke of shared loss, of shared resilience, of shared hope. As they broke apart, they looked at each other, their eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. The scars of the past were still there, the echoes of the heart still resonated, but in that moment, in that secluded place, by that tranquil lake, something new had begun to blossom, a fragile flower of love growing amidst the ruins of their lives. The sunset's final rays painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a silent benediction on their unspoken vow. Chapter 6. The Loom of Deceit. The tentative peace of Ravensshire was shattered by the arrival of a messenger. He was a young man, travel-worn and anxious, bearing a sealed letter addressed to Lady Cecily. He refused to speak to anyone but her, insisting that the message was of the utmost importance and secrecy. Cecily, her heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation, took the letter into the library, the only room in the castle that offered some semblance of privacy. Nicholas stood guard outside the door, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The letter was from her cousin, Annalise, the one person in the court she had trusted implicitly. The handwriting was hurried, the ink blotched in places, as if written in haste and fear. Cecily, the letter began, I write to you with grave news. The king has grown increasingly paranoid, his suspicions fueled by the whispers of Lord Montrose, who has risen high in his favor. Montrose has convinced the king that you are not only plotting against him, but that Sir Nicholas Warwick was your accomplice, your lover, and the mastermind behind the conspiracy. Cecily felt a cold dread creep through her. Montrose. She should have known. He had always been ambitious, ruthless, and envious of her position in the court. He had seen her as an obstacle, a rival, and he had used the king's paranoia to eliminate her. The king has issued a warrant for both your arrests, Annalise continued, and he has offered a substantial reward for your capture, dead or alive. Bounty hunters are scouring the countryside, and Montrose has sent his own men, led by his captain, Sir Gareth, a cruel and merciless warrior. Cecily's hand trembled as she read the words. Sir Gareth. She had heard tales of his brutality, of his unwavering loyalty to Montrose. He was a man without honor, without compassion, a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. I have done what I can to delay them, Annalise wrote, but I fear it is not enough. You must flee, Cecily. Go further north, to the wild lands beyond the border, where the king's writ does not run. Trust no one, and may God protect you. The letter ended abruptly, with a final, desperate plea. Burn this letter after you have read it. Cecily did as instructed, watching as the flames consumed the parchment, turning the words of warning and fear into ashes. She felt a wave of despair wash over her. She had thought she had found sanctuary at Ravensshire, a place where she could rebuild her life, where she could find peace. But now, it seemed, even this refuge was no longer safe. She turned to Nicholas, who had entered the room, his expression grim. She told him the contents of the letter, her voice trembling with fear. We must leave, she said. Tonight. Before they find us. Nicholas nodded, his jaw tight. I know a place, he said. A hidden valley deep in the mountains. It is difficult to reach, well defended. We will be safe there for a time. They gathered their meager possessions, packing food, weapons, and a few essential supplies. They saddled their horses, the black stallion that Nicholas had ridden to Ravensshire, and a sturdy mare that they had acquired from Alara. As they were about to leave, Alara arrived, her face etched with worry. She had heard rumors in the village, whispers of bounty hunters and soldiers searching for a noblewoman and a disgraced knight. You must go, she said, her voice urgent. And Godspeed. This region is no longer secure for you. She pressed a small pouch into Cecily's hand. Herbs, she said. For healing, for protection. Use them wisely. Cecily embraced Alara, tears welling in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. They rode through the night, following a treacherous path that led them high into the mountains. The terrain was rugged, the air thin and cold. They had to dismount and lead their horses in places, the path so narrow and steep that it was impossible to ride. As dawn approached, they reached a narrow gorge, its entrance concealed by a thick curtain of trees. Nicholas led them through the gorge, and then, suddenly, they emerged into a hidden valley, a breathtaking vista of green meadows, sparkling streams, and towering peaks. It was a place of stunning beauty, a secret sanctuary untouched by the outside world. A small, stone cottage, nestled beside a rushing stream, offered shelter and a promise of respite. This is it, Nicholas said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and weariness. We will be safe here. But even in this idyllic setting, Cecily could not shake the feeling of unease. The loom of deceit had been spun, its threads reaching far and wide, ensnaring her in a web of treachery and betrayal. She knew that they were not truly safe, that the king's wrath, fueled by Montrose's ambition, would continue to pursue them. She knew that this was only a temporary reprieve, a brief respite before the storm broke once more. The beauty of the valley was a stark contrast to the ugliness of the plot that had driven them there, a reminder of what they had lost and what they were still fighting for. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Cloisters. The hidden valley provided a sanctuary, but it was also a prison of sorts. Cecily and Nicholas were isolated, cut off from the world, their only companions each other and the wild creatures that roamed the mountains. They lived a simple life, hunting for game, gathering wild berries and herbs, and tending to the small garden that surrounded the cottage. They worked together, their shared labor strengthening the bond between them. But the shadow of the outside world, of the threat that hung over them, never truly faded. They knew that they could not stay hidden forever, that eventually, they would have to face their enemies. Nicholas, driven by a need to understand the plot that had led to their exile, began to make clandestine trips to the nearby villages, gathering information, listening to rumors, trying to piece together the puzzle of their betrayal. He used the skills he had honed as a knight, his ability to observe, to analyze, to gather intelligence, to uncover the truth. He learned that Montrose had consolidated his power at court, that he had become the king's closest advisor, that he was using his influence to enrich himself and to crush his enemies. He also learned that Sir Gareth, Montrose's captain, was still searching for them, his brutality and ruthlessness becoming legendary. One evening, Nicholas returned from one of his trips, his face grim, his expression troubled. He had discovered something that shook him to his core. "I have learned the identity of the person who betrayed us," he said, his voice low and strained. "The person who spread the lies about you, Cecily, the person who orchestrated our downfall." Cecily felt a cold dread creep through her. She had suspected Montrose, but Nicholas's words suggested that the truth was even more devastating. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, his gaze avoiding hers.
It was Annalise, he said.
Cecily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Annalise? Her cousin, her closest confidant, the one person she had trusted implicitly? It was impossible. It couldn't be true. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You must be mistaken. Annalise would never betray me. She was my friend." Nicholas looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and pain. "I wish it were not so, Cecily," he said. "But the evidence is irrefutable. I've spoken to several sources, all of whom confirm her involvement. She was jealous of your position, of your beauty, of your influence. She saw you as a rival, and she used Montrose to eliminate you." Cecily felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The betrayal cut deep, a wound to her heart that felt far more painful than any physical injury. She had trusted Annalise, she had loved her, and now she learned that that trust had been a lie, that love had been betrayed.
"But why?"
she asked, her voice trembling. Why would she do this? Nicholas shrugged, a gesture of helplessness. "Ambition," he said.
"Greed."
"Envy. The same forces that drive so much of the evil in this world. She wanted what you had, and she was willing to do anything to get it." Cecily sank onto a stool, her body shaking with silent sobs. The world she had known, the world of trust and loyalty, had crumbled around her, leaving her with nothing but ashes and despair. Nicholas knelt beside her, his hand reaching out to comfort her. "I am sorry, Cecily," he said softly. "I know this is hard, but you are not alone. I am here. We will face this together." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. She saw in his gaze a reflection of her own pain, her own sense of betrayal. She also saw something else, something that gave her a flicker of hope, a strength, a determination, a resolve to fight back. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice still trembling, but with a newfound resolve. "We fight," he said, his voice firm. "We expose Annalise's treachery. We clear our names. We reclaim what we have lost." He spoke of a plan, a daring and dangerous plan, to infiltrate the court, to gather evidence, to confront Annalise and Montrose, to expose their lies to the king. It was a risky plan, a gamble that could cost them their lives. But it was also their only hope. Cecily hesitated, her fear battling with her desire for justice. But she knew that she could not stay hidden in this valley forever, that she could not live with the stain of treason on her name. She had to fight, not just for herself, but for Nicholas, for the future they had begun to build together. She nodded, her eyes meeting his. "I am with you," she said. "We will do this together." Their plan involved seeking help from an unlikely source, a secluded monastery known for its neutrality and its extensive library, rumored to contain secret chronicles and records of past court intrigues. The monks, sworn to silence and neutrality, were said to be keepers of hidden knowledge, their cloisters a refuge for those seeking truth and justice. The whispers in the cloisters, Nicholas believed, might hold the key to unraveling the loom of deceit that had ensnared them. Chapter 8. A Dance of Masks and Daggers. The journey to the monastery of St. Giles was arduous, fraught with danger. Cecily and Nicholas traveled in disguise, she as a humble peasant woman, he as a traveling merchant. They avoided the main roads, sticking to hidden paths and byways, constantly on guard against the king's men and Montrose's bounty hunters. They reached the monastery under the cover of darkness, its imposing stone walls looming against the moonlit sky. The air was still and cold, scented with the faint aroma of incense and old parchment. They were met by a silent monk, his face hidden by the deep cowl of his habit, who led them through a maze of corridors to a small, sparsely furnished cell. The abbot, a man of advanced age, but with eyes that shone with intelligence and wisdom, received them with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Nicholas, using the signet ring as proof of his identity and his connection to a past benefactor of the monastery, explained their situation, their need for sanctuary, and for access to the monastery's archives. The abbot listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He was bound by his vows of neutrality, but he also recognized the injustice that had been done to Cecily and Nicholas. He agreed to help them, but on one condition: they must remain hidden, their presence a secret known only to him and a few trusted brothers. They spent several days in the monastery, poring over ancient chronicles, royal decrees, and personal letters, searching for evidence that could expose Annalise's treachery and Montrose's conspiracy. The work was tedious, the hours long, but they were driven by a desperate hope that they would find something, anything, that could clear their names. Cecily, with her knowledge of courtly intrigue and her familiarity with the key players, proved to be invaluable in this task. She recognized names, deciphered coded messages, and pieced together fragments of information, revealing a pattern of deceit and manipulation that stretched back years. They discovered that Annalise had been secretly working with Montrose for a long time, feeding him information, spreading rumors, and undermining Cecily's position in the court. They also found evidence that Montrose had been embezzling funds from the royal treasury, using his influence to enrich himself and to build a network of loyal followers. But the most damning piece of evidence was a letter written by Annalise to Montrose, outlining their plan to accuse Cecily of treason and to use Sir Nicholas as a scapegoat. The letter was filled with venomous hatred, with a chilling disregard for truth and justice. Nicholas obtained a private audience with the king, presenting the evidence of the compiled, twisted truths. He was still skeptical, but his paranoia had made space for doubt. As the hearing took place, Cecily waited in a guarded chamber. Annalise was brought in, pale and trembling. She denied the accusations at first, but when confronted with the evidence, with her own letter, her composure crumbled. She confessed her treachery, her voice breaking with sobs. She begged for forgiveness, but it was too late. Montrose, realizing that his plot had been exposed, tried to flee, but he was captured by the king's guards. He, too, was brought before the king, his arrogance replaced by fear. The king, enraged by their betrayal, ordered their immediate imprisonment. He stripped them of their titles, their lands, their possessions. He sentenced them to a fate worse than death, a lifetime of confinement in the darkest dungeons of the castle. Cecily, vindicated and exonerated, was restored to her former position, her honor regained. But the victory felt hollow, the triumph tinged with sadness. She had lost her friend, her cousin, to the corrosive power of ambition and envy. The ordeal had changed her, had hardened her, had made her more aware of the darkness that lurked beneath the glittering surface of courtly life. She had learned a bitter lesson about the fragility of trust, the pervasiveness of deceit, the price of survival. She and Nicholas danced around the delicate topic of returning to court. Cecily couldn't ignore how uneasy it made her. The political dance was tiring and full of false friends. "I want to give you back your titles, lands, holdings," she began. Nicholas, his heart on his sleeve, replied, "Ravensshire is our home now. Our home." "Together?" He nodded. "If you will have me, my lady." The court held a blade over their heads, but their sanctuary had offered peace. Cecily had never felt so torn. I don't want to dance with masks and daggers, ever again. Here, I don't have to, do I? Nicholas gently cupped her face. Never. He promised. But the king. He understands, my lady. He has pardoned us both fully and has allowed my retirement. He even joked that he wished he could join us. Cecily laughed, tears in her eyes. It sounded too good to be true, but she could see it in Nicholas's eyes.
Truth. Love.
Home. She kissed him. It felt complete. It felt like forever. The ghosts were finally silenced. A new chapter had begun. Chapter 9. The Price of Loyalty. The decision to remain at Ravenshire, to forsake the court and its treacherous intrigues, was not an easy one. Cecily had been raised to navigate that world, to play the game of power and influence. She had known no other life. But the betrayal she had suffered, the ordeal she had endured, had changed her. She had seen the darkness that lay beneath the glittering surface, the corruption that festered in the hearts of the ambitious. She had learned that true loyalty, true love, was found not in the grand halls of castles, but in the quiet corners of the heart. Nicholas, too, had been shaped by his experiences. He had been a knight of the realm, sworn to serve the king, to uphold justice, to defend the innocent. But he had seen that justice was often a matter of convenience, that innocence was no protection against the machinations of the powerful. He had learned that true honor lay not in blind obedience, but in following one's conscience, in standing up for what was right, even at the cost of one's own life. They returned to Ravensshire, not as fugitives, but as free people, their names cleared, their honor restored. But they were also changed, scarred by their experiences, their innocence lost, their trust shattered. They had found love, yes, but it was a love forged in adversity, a love tempered by loss, a love that carried the weight of the past. The king, though he had pardoned them and restored their titles, was still wary of them. He knew that they possessed knowledge that could be dangerous, that they had seen the dark underbelly of his court. He offered them positions of power, inducements to return to his service, but they refused. They had chosen a different path, a path of peace, of simplicity, of self-reliance. The people of the surrounding villages, who had initially been suspicious of them, now welcomed them as their own. They had seen Cecily's resilience, her determination to rebuild Ravensshire, her willingness to work alongside them. They had seen Nicholas's strength, his honor, his commitment to justice. They respected them, admired them, and offered them their loyalty. But the peace of Ravensshire was not undisturbed. There were those who still resented their presence, who saw them as a threat, who whispered of their past, who plotted their downfall. Montrose and Annalise, though imprisoned, still had allies, loyal followers who sought to avenge their downfall. One evening, as Cecily and Nicholas were returning from a visit to Alara, they were ambushed by a group of armed men. The attack was sudden, unexpected, and brutal. Nicholas fought fiercely, his sword flashing in the twilight, but they were outnumbered, overwhelmed. Cecily, armed with the dagger Nicholas had taught her to use, fought alongside him, her fear battling with a desperate determination to survive. She managed to wound one of the attackers, but she was quickly disarmed, thrown to the ground, her arm twisted behind her back. Nicholas, seeing Cecily in danger, fought with renewed fury, his sword a blur of motion. He managed to kill two of the attackers, but he was struck by a blow from behind, falling to his knees, his sword clattering to the ground. The leader of the attackers, a man with a scarred face and cold, cruel eyes, approached Cecily, his sword pointed at her throat. "You should have stayed in exile," he said, his voice harsh and guttural. "You should have known that Montrose's vengeance would reach you, even here." Cecily looked at him, her eyes filled with defiance. "Montrose is a traitor," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He deserves his fate." The man laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Loyalty is a fool's virtue," he said. "Power is all that matters. And Montrose still has power, even in prison. He has friends, allies, who will see his will done." He raised his sword, ready to strike the killing blow. But before he could, an arrow whistled through the air, striking him in the chest. He gasped, his eyes widening in surprise, and he crumpled to the ground, dead. The other attackers, seeing their leader fall, hesitated, their resolve faltering. Another arrow flew, and another, striking 2 more of them. They turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness. Cecily looked up, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing on a nearby ridge, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, was a figure she recognized. It was Alara, armed with a bow and arrow, her face grim and determined. Alara rushed to their side, her eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cecily nodded, her body shaking with reaction. Nicholas, though wounded, was still alive. He had a deep gash on his shoulder, but it was not life-threatening. Alara helped them to their feet, and together they tended to Nicholas's wound. Alara, with her knowledge of herbs and remedies, cleaned the wound and applied a poultice, easing the pain. "They were Montrose's men," Cecily said, her voice filled with anger and frustration. "They will not stop until we are dead." Alara nodded, her expression grim. "You are not safe here," she said. "Not anymore. Montrose's reach is long, his hatred deep. You must leave Ravensshire. Go far away, to a place where he cannot find you." Cecily and Nicholas looked at each other, their eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. They had hoped to find peace at Ravensshire, to build a new life, to escape the shadows of the past. But it seemed that fate had other plans. The price of loyalty, they realized, was constant vigilance, constant struggle, constant sacrifice. The ambush had been a brutal reminder that their past was not buried, and that their enemies were still lurking, waiting for their chance to strike. Chapter 10. Beneath a Sky of Thorns. The decision to leave Ravensshire, again, was a heavy blow. They had poured their hearts and souls into rebuilding the castle, into forging a new life amidst its ruins. They had found a measure of peace, a sense of belonging, a community that had welcomed them as their own. But the threat of Montrose's vengeance, the knowledge that they were no longer safe, forced their hand. They packed their meager possessions, their hearts heavy with sadness and regret. They said goodbye to Alara, their friend, their protector, their guide, tears streaming down their faces. Alara, her own eyes filled with tears, promised to watch over Ravensshire, to keep their memory alive. They rode north, towards the wild lands beyond the border, a region known for its rugged terrain, its lawless inhabitants, its fierce independence. It was a dangerous place, a place where survival was a constant struggle, but it was also a place where the king's writ did not run, where Montrose's influence held no sway. The journey was arduous, the landscape bleak and unforgiving. They traveled through dense forests, across windswept moors, over treacherous mountain passes. The weather was harsh, the wind cold and biting, the rain relentless. They slept under the open sky, their bodies aching, their spirits weary. They encountered other travelers, some friendly, some hostile. They learned to be wary, to trust no one, to rely on their own instincts. They faced hunger, thirst, exhaustion, but they pressed on, driven by a desperate hope that they would find a place where they could finally be safe, where they could finally be free. One evening, as they were camped beside a small, swift-flowing river, Nicholas spoke of a legend, a story he had heard from the monks at the monastery of St. Giles. It was a story of a hidden valley, a place of refuge, a sanctuary for those fleeing persecution. "They call it the Valley of Avalon," he said, his voice low and hushed. "It is said to be a place of eternal spring, a place of peace and tranquility, a place where the wounds of the past are healed, where the sorrows of the heart are forgotten." Cecily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of skepticism and hope. "A legend, Nicholas?" she asked. "Is that all it is?" He shrugged, a familiar gesture that spoke of his own uncertainty. "Perhaps," he said. "But legends often have a grain of truth, and we have nothing to lose by searching for it." They decided to follow the river, hoping that it would lead them to this mythical valley. They traveled for days, the landscape gradually changing, the harsh terrain giving way to rolling hills and verdant meadows. The air grew warmer, the sun brighter, the scent of wildflowers filled the air. One morning, as they rounded a bend in the river, they saw it. A hidden valley, bathed in sunlight, surrounded by towering peaks. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, a scene of serene tranquility, a vision of paradise. They rode into the valley, their hearts filled with awe and wonder. The air was warm and still, scented with the fragrance of blossoms and herbs. The meadows were carpeted with wildflowers, the trees laden with fruit. A crystal-clear stream meandered through the valley, its waters sparkling in the sunlight. They saw no sign of human habitation, no sign of civilization. It was as if they had stumbled upon a lost world, a place untouched by time, a sanctuary from the storms of life. They dismounted, their legs trembling with exhaustion and relief. They stood there for a moment, gazing at the scene before them, their hearts filled with a sense of peace they had not felt in years. Could this be it? Cecily whispered, her voice filled with awe. Could this be Avalon? Nicholas nodded, his eyes shining with a newfound hope.
Perhaps, he said.
Perhaps we have finally found our sanctuary. They explored the valley, discovering a small, abandoned cottage nestled beside the stream. It was in need of repair, but it was structurally sound, a potential shelter, a potential home. They set about cleaning the cottage, repairing the roof, clearing the overgrown garden. They worked together, their shared labor a testament to their resilience, their determination to build a new life, to create a haven in this hidden paradise. But even in this idyllic setting, the shadows of the past lingered. They knew that they could never truly escape their enemies, that Montrose's vengeance would continue to pursue them. They knew that this peace, this tranquility, was fragile, temporary, a brief respite before the storm broke once more. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the valley, Cecily stood beside Nicholas, her hand in his. She looked up at the sky, a sky filled with thorns of stars, a reminder of the dangers that still lurked, the challenges that still awaited them. We will never be truly free, will we? She said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. Nicholas looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and determination.
Perhaps not, he said.
But we will be together. And that is all that matters. He put his arm around her shoulder, drawing her in. We'll build our fortress here. Not of stone, but of us. Cecily leaned into him. It was enough for now. Enough to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Chapter 11. The Falcon and the Dove. Life in the Valley of Avalon settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment. Cecily and Nicholas worked tirelessly to make the cottage a home, cultivating the garden, hunting for game, and exploring the surrounding wilderness. They discovered hidden waterfalls, ancient groves, and breathtaking vistas, each new discovery reinforcing their sense of wonder and gratitude for this unexpected sanctuary. Their relationship deepened, evolving from a partnership forged in adversity to a love that blossomed in the fertile soil of shared peace and mutual respect. They spoke of their pasts, sharing their sorrows, their regrets, their hopes for the future. They learned to trust each other completely, to rely on each other's strengths, to forgive each other's weaknesses. One day, while exploring a nearby forest, Nicholas discovered a falcon with a broken wing. He carefully captured the bird, bringing it back to the cottage, where Cecily, with her knowledge of herbs and remedies, tended to its injury. They named the falcon Valor, a symbol of their own resilience, their own determination to survive. Cecily, in turn, found a wounded dove, its feathers ruffled and torn. She nursed the dove back to health, naming it Hope, a symbol of their newfound peace, their belief in a brighter future. The falcon and the dove, two creatures so different, yet both survivors, became a part of their small family, a constant reminder of the fragility of life, the importance of compassion, the enduring power of love. Nicholas, with his skills as a knight, trained Valor to hunt, teaching the falcon to soar through the sky, to dive with breathtaking speed, to bring down prey. Cecily, with her gentle touch, taught Hope to trust, to perch on her shoulder, to coo softly in her ear. They often watched the falcon and the dove together, Valor soaring high above the valley, Hope circling gently below. It was a scene of contrasting beauty, a symbol of their own relationship, a blend of strength and gentleness, of courage and compassion, of wildness and peace. One evening, as they sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal of roasted rabbit and wild berries, Nicholas spoke of his desire to build a small chapel in the valley, a place of worship, a symbol of their gratitude for their newfound sanctuary. Cecily agreed, her heart filled with a sense of peace and contentment. She had never been a particularly devout woman, but her experiences had taught her the importance of faith, the comfort of prayer, the solace of spiritual connection. They chose a secluded spot, nestled beside the stream, surrounded by ancient trees. They worked together, clearing the ground, gathering stones, building the walls. Nicholas, with his strength and skill, did the heavy lifting, while Cecily, with her artistic eye, designed the interior, carving intricate patterns into the wooden beams, creating a space of beauty and tranquility. They built a small altar, adorned with wildflowers and candles. They placed a simple wooden cross above the altar, a symbol of their shared faith, their belief in a higher power, their hope for a future free from fear and persecution. When the chapel was finished, they knelt together before the altar, their hands clasped in prayer. They gave thanks for their sanctuary, for their love, for their newfound peace. They prayed for strength, for courage, for guidance. They prayed for the future, for a world free from hatred and violence, for a world where justice and compassion prevailed. As they prayed, a sense of profound peace settled over them, a feeling of connection, of belonging, of being part of something larger than themselves. They had found their sanctuary, not just in the physical beauty of the valley, but in the spiritual connection they had forged, in the love they shared, in the hope they held in their hearts. The chapel became a place of refuge, a place where they could retreat from the world, where they could find solace in prayer, where they could renew their spirits. It was a symbol of their commitment to each other, to their faith, to their future. The falcon and the dove often perched on the roof of the chapel, their presence a silent blessing, a reminder of the enduring power of love and hope, even in the face of adversity. Cecily looked out of the window to see them sitting side by side. She smiled. It felt ordained, blessed. Chapter 12. Trials of Faith and Fire. The idyllic peace of Avalon was not to last. The outside world, with its conflicts and its dangers, intruded upon their sanctuary, testing their resilience, their faith, and their love. A group of bandits, fleeing from the king's justice, stumbled upon the valley. They were a ruthless band, hardened by years of violence and lawlessness. They saw the valley as an easy target, a place to plunder and pillage, a place to satisfy their greed and their lust for power. They attacked the cottage, their intentions clear: to take what they wanted, to kill anyone who stood in their way. Nicholas, armed with his sword, fought fiercely to defend their home, to protect Cecily. He was a skilled warrior, but he was outnumbered, overwhelmed by the sheer brutality of the attack. Cecily, armed with a knife and her own fierce determination, fought alongside him. She had learned much from Nicholas, but she was no match for these hardened criminals. She was quickly disarmed, thrown to the ground, her life in imminent danger. Nicholas, seeing Cecily threatened, fought with renewed fury, his sword a blur of motion. He managed to kill several of the bandits, but he was wounded, his arm slashed by a blade, his strength fading. The leader of the bandits, a hulking brute with a scarred face and cold, cruel eyes, approached Cecily, his sword raised, ready to strike the killing blow. "This valley is ours now," he growled, his voice filled with menace. "And you will be our prize." Cecily closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. She prayed for a swift death, for a release from this nightmare. But the blow never came. Instead, she heard a piercing cry, a sound that filled the air with terror. She opened her eyes and saw Valor, the falcon, diving from the sky, its talons extended, its eyes fixed on the bandit leader. Valor struck with incredible force, its talons tearing at the bandit's face, its beak ripping at his flesh. The bandit screamed in pain and surprise, dropping his sword, his hands clawing at his eyes. Nicholas, seizing the opportunity, lunged forward, his sword finding its mark. The bandit leader crumpled to the ground, dead. The remaining bandits, demoralized by the death of their leader and terrified by the ferocity of the falcon, hesitated, their resolve faltering. Nicholas pressed his advantage, his sword flashing in the sunlight. He fought with the strength of a cornered lion, his love for Cecily fueling his rage. He killed another bandit and another. The rest turned and fled, disappearing into the forest, leaving behind the bodies of their fallen comrades. Nicholas, exhausted and wounded, collapsed beside Cecily, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Cecily, though shaken and bruised, was unharmed. She rushed to his side, her heart pounding with fear and relief. She tended to his wounds, using her knowledge of herbs and remedies to clean and bind the gash on his arm. Valor perched on a nearby tree, its feathers ruffled, its eyes watching them with an almost human intelligence. They had survived the attack, but the valley no longer felt safe. The illusion of sanctuary had been shattered, the peace disturbed by violence and bloodshed. They knew that they could not stay here, that the bandits might return, that other dangers might lurk in the shadows. That night, a fire broke out in the cottage. It started in the kitchen, possibly caused by a stray ember from the hearth. They awoke to the smell of smoke, the crackling of flames, the terrifying roar of a fire consuming their home. They managed to escape the cottage, their belongings lost to the flames. They stood outside, watching as their home, their sanctuary, burned to the ground. The chapel, thankfully, was untouched, its stone walls resistant to the flames. The fire was a devastating blow, a symbol of their vulnerability, their fragility. They had lost everything again. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs, the weapons they carried, and the falcon and the dove, who had also escaped the flames. They took refuge in the chapel, the only shelter left to them. They huddled together, their bodies shivering from cold and fear. They had faced trials of faith and fire, their resilience tested, their love strained. But even in this moment of utter despair, they did not give up. They still had each other, they still had their faith, they still had their hope. They would survive, they would rebuild, they would find a way to overcome this latest adversity. The dawn would come, and with it a new challenge, a new opportunity, a new beginning. Cecily looked at the exhausted, scared faces around her. Valor perched on Nicholas' shoulder, and hope snuggled on hers. "We are still here," she thought, "and we are together." Chapter 13. The Unveiling of Truth. The destruction of their cottage, coupled with a bandit attack, forced Cecily and Nicholas to confront a harsh reality. Avalon, despite its beauty and initial promise of peace, was not immune to the dangers of the outside world. They could not hide forever. They needed to understand the forces arrayed against them, to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy that had driven them into exile. Nicholas, despite his injuries, insisted on returning to the monastery of St. Giles. He believed that the monks, with their extensive library and their network of contacts, might hold the key to unraveling the remaining mysteries surrounding Montrose's plot and Annalise's betrayal. Cecily, though reluctant to leave the relative safety of the valley, knew that he was right. They could not rebuild their lives on a foundation of unanswered questions and lingering threats. Their journey back to the monastery was even more perilous than before. They were fugitives, their faces known, their names associated with treason and rebellion. They traveled under the cover of darkness, avoiding the main roads, relying on their wits and their skills to evade capture. They reached the monastery exhausted and battered, their clothes torn, their bodies bruised and aching. The abbot, though surprised to see them, welcomed them with open arms, offering them sanctuary and assistance. He had heard rumors of their plight, of the bounty on their heads, of the relentless pursuit by Montrose's men. Nicholas, with Cecily's help, delved back into the monastery's archives, searching for any clue that might shed light on the deeper machinations of the court. They discovered a hidden connection between Montrose and a powerful, secretive organization known as the Order of the Serpent, a group rumored to be involved in all manner of illicit activities, from smuggling and extortion to political assassination and even heresy. The Order of the Serpent, they learned, was ancient, its roots stretching back centuries. It was said to be dedicated to undermining the established order, to sowing chaos and discord, to seizing power for its own shadowy purposes. Montrose, it seemed, was not just a power-hungry nobleman, he was a puppet of this organization, a pawn in a much larger game. But the most shocking revelation was the identity of the Order's leader, the mastermind behind the conspiracy that had ensnared Cecily and Nicholas. It was not Montrose, nor Annalise, nor any of the usual suspects. It was someone far closer to the king, someone who had his complete trust, someone who had manipulated him for years. It was the king's own chancellor, Lord Elmsworth. Elmsworth, a man of seemingly impeccable reputation, a man known for his piety and his wisdom, had been secretly plotting against the king, using Montrose as his instrument, Annalise as his informant, and Cecily as his scapegoat. He had orchestrated the entire conspiracy, fueling the king's paranoia, manipulating events to his own advantage, all with the ultimate goal of seizing the throne for himself. The evidence they found was irrefutable: coded letters, secret accounts, witness testimonies, all pointing to Elmsworth's treachery. They had uncovered the truth, but it was a truth far more dangerous than they had imagined. They were not just fighting against a power-hungry nobleman and a jealous cousin, they were fighting against a hidden power, a secret organization, a conspiracy that reached the very heart of the kingdom. Nicholas and Cecily knew what they had to do. They had to go to the king directly. The evidence was clear, undeniable, and Elmsworth needed to be stopped, at any cost. Cecily looked at Nicholas. "Are you sure? We barely made it out alive last time." Nicholas nodded. "It's the only way, my lady. For the kingdom, and for our future. He won't expect it. That's our advantage." They prepared for one last confrontation, one final battle, a showdown that would determine not only their own fate, but the fate of the entire kingdom. The unveiling of truth had been a long and arduous journey, but it had led them to this moment, this precipice, where they would either triumph or fall, where justice would either be served or denied. They knew the risks, they knew the dangers, but they were ready. They had come too far to turn back now. Chapter 14. A Tapestry of Secrets. The journey back to the royal court was a stark contrast to their flight into exile. They were no longer fugitives, but bearers of a truth that could shatter the kingdom. They traveled with a sense of purpose, a determination to expose Elmsworth's treachery and to reclaim their lives. Nicholas, using his contacts among the loyal knights who had served with him before his disgrace, arranged for a secret audience with the king. It was a risky gamble, relying on the trust and loyalty of men who had been forced to choose between their oaths to the king and their belief in Nicholas's innocence. They arrived at the court disguised, not as peasants, but as minor nobles from a distant province, their identities concealed, their purpose hidden. The court was a whirlwind of activity, a hive of intrigue and ambition, a place where secrets were currency and betrayal was commonplace. Cecily, with her intimate knowledge of courtly protocol and her ability to navigate its treacherous currents, guided Nicholas through the maze of alliances and rivalries. She recognized faces, remembered conversations, deciphered hidden meanings, piecing together the tapestry of secrets that had been woven around them. They discovered that Elmsworth had consolidated his power, that he had surrounded himself with loyal followers, that he had effectively taken control of the kingdom. The king, weakened by illness and paranoia, was little more than a puppet in his hands. The audience with the king was arranged for the dead of night, in a secluded chamber deep within the castle. Nicholas and Cecily, their hearts pounding with apprehension and anticipation, waited in the shadows, their hands resting on the hilts of their concealed weapons. The king, when he finally arrived, looked a shadow of his former self. He was pale and gaunt, his eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and fear. He was surrounded by guards, all of whom were loyal to Elmsworth. Nicholas, speaking with a quiet authority that belied his disguise, presented the evidence they had gathered. The letters, the accounts, the testimonies, all pointing to Elmsworth's treachery. He spoke of the Order of the Serpent, of its ancient origins, of its sinister goals, of its influence over the court. The king listened in stunned silence, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to a growing horror. He had trusted Elmsworth, had relied on his counsel, had believed in his loyalty. Now, he was confronted with the truth, a truth that shattered his illusions, that threatened to destroy his kingdom. Elmsworth, who had been summoned to the king's presence, arrived with an air of confidence, unaware of the trap that had been laid for him. He dismissed the accusations as lies, as the fabrications of disgruntled exiles seeking to regain their lost positions. But Nicholas had anticipated this. He had arranged for witnesses to be present, hidden in the shadows, ready to testify to Elmsworth's treachery. He had also secured the support of several key nobles, men who had grown suspicious of Elmsworth's growing power, who were ready to turn against him. As the evidence mounted, as the witnesses spoke, as the nobles revealed their doubts, Elmsworth's composure began to crack. He tried to bluster, to deny, to deflect, but it was too late. The tapestry of secrets he had so carefully woven was unraveling, exposing his treachery for all to see. The king, finally convinced of Elmsworth's guilt, ordered his arrest. The guards, their loyalty shifting from Elmsworth to their rightful sovereign, seized the chancellor, binding his hands, stripping him of his authority. Elmsworth, his face contorted with rage and despair, turned to Cecily and Nicholas, his eyes filled with venomous hatred. "You may have won this battle," he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "But you will not win the war. The Order of the Serpent is too powerful, too deeply entrenched. It will survive, and it will have its revenge." His words were a chilling reminder that the struggle was far from over, that the forces of darkness were still at large, that the future remained uncertain. But for now, a victory had been won, a truth had been revealed, a justice had been served. Cecily and Nicholas, their mission accomplished, their names cleared, their honor restored, watched as Elmsworth was led away, his reign of terror brought to an end. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, their love strengthened, their bond unbreakable. The tapestry of secrets had been torn apart, revealing the truth that lay beneath, a truth that would reshape the kingdom and their own lives forever. But Elmsworth's final threat echoed. They knew deep down that the battle was truly just the beginning. Chapter 15. The Lioness Rises. With Elmsworth's arrest and the exposure of the Order of the Serpent, the court was thrown into turmoil. The king, shaken by the betrayal of his closest advisor, embarked on a purge of Elmsworth's loyalists, rooting out corruption and restoring order to his kingdom. Cecily and Nicholas, hailed as heroes, were offered positions of power and influence. The king, deeply grateful for their loyalty and their courage, urged them to return to court, to help him rebuild his shattered realm. But Cecily, having witnessed the darkness that lurked beneath the glittering surface of courtly life, was reluctant to return to that world. She had found peace and contentment at Ravensshire, and later, in the Valley of Avalon. She had no desire to be drawn back into the treacherous currents of political intrigue. Nicholas, too, was hesitant. He had been a knight of the realm, sworn to serve the king, but his experiences had taught him that true honor lay not in blind obedience, but in following one's conscience. He had found a different kind of service, a different kind of loyalty, in his love for Cecily and in his commitment to building a life outside the confines of the court. They discussed their options, their hearts torn between their duty to the king and their desire for a life of peace and simplicity. They decided to return to Ravensshire, to the place where they had first found sanctuary, to the community that had welcomed them as their own. But their return to Ravensshire was not a retreat. It was a strategic decision, a recognition that true power lay not in the halls of the court, but in the hearts of the people. They would use their influence, their knowledge, their experience, to build a different kind of kingdom, a kingdom founded on justice, compassion, and loyalty. Cecily, in particular, emerged as a leader, a force for change. She had always been intelligent, resourceful, and determined, but her experiences had transformed her, had awakened a strength within her that she had never known she possessed. She became known as the Lioness of Ravensshire, a symbol of courage, resilience, and unwavering justice. She established a council of elders, drawn from the surrounding villages, to advise her on matters of governance. She reformed the local laws, ensuring that they were fair and equitable. She encouraged trade and agriculture, promoting prosperity and stability. She built schools and hospitals, providing education and health care for her people. Nicholas, though he preferred to remain in the background, supported Cecily in every way. He used his military skills to train a local militia, protecting Ravensshire from bandits and other threats. He oversaw the rebuilding of the castle, transforming it not into a fortress, but into a center of learning and community. Together, they created a haven of peace and prosperity, a model of just and compassionate governance. They attracted people from all walks of life, seeking refuge from the turmoil and corruption of the court. Ravensshire became known as a place of sanctuary, a place where the law was fair, where the people were valued, where the lioness and the knight ruled with wisdom and compassion. But the shadow of the Order of the Serpent still lingered. Elmsworth, though imprisoned, still had followers, still had influence. They plotted in secret, seeking to undermine Cecily and Nicholas, to reclaim their lost power. Cecily, aware of the threat, established a network of informants, gathering intelligence, monitoring the activities of suspected members of the Order. She knew that the struggle was far from over, that the forces of darkness were still at large, that she would have to remain vigilant, to protect her people, to defend her kingdom. She had risen from the ashes of betrayal and exile, transforming herself from a pawn in the game of power to a player in her own right. She was the Lioness of Ravensshire, and she would not rest until her people were safe, until justice prevailed, until the shadow of the serpent had been banished forever. Her transformation was complete, her power undeniable, her resolve unbreakable. Chapter 16. When Shadows Clash. The simmering threat of the Order of the Serpent finally erupted into open conflict. A coordinated attack was launched on Ravensshire, led by a shadowy figure known only as the Serpent's Fong, a ruthless and skilled warrior rumored to be Elmsworth's protégé. The attack came at night, a swift and brutal assault designed to overwhelm Ravenshire's defenses and assassinate Cecily and Nicholas. The attackers, masked and clad in black, moved with a chilling efficiency, their movements precise, their intentions deadly. Nicholas, alerted by the watchmen, rallied the militia, preparing for a desperate defense. He knew that they were outnumbered, outmatched, but he was determined to protect Ravensshire, to protect Cecily, to fight to the death if necessary. Cecily, refusing to remain hidden, armed herself with a sword and joined the fray. She had trained with Nicholas, had honed her skills, had become a warrior in her own right. She would not stand idly by while her home, her people, were threatened. The battle raged throughout the night, a chaotic clash of steel and fire. The attackers, fueled by a fanatical loyalty to the Order of the Serpent, fought with a savage intensity. The defenders of Ravensshire, inspired by Nicholas's courage and Cecily's leadership, fought with a desperate determination to protect their homes, their families, their freedom. Nicholas, his sword flashing in the moonlight, fought like a man possessed. He cut down one attacker after another, his movements swift and precise, his strength fueled by a righteous fury. But he was wounded, a deep gash on his leg, his movements hampered, his strength fading. Cecily, fighting alongside him, saw his vulnerability. She moved to protect him, her sword deflecting a blow aimed at his head. She fought with a fierce determination, her love for Nicholas giving her strength, her courage overcoming her fear. The Serpent's Fong, recognizing Cecily as the key to Ravenshire's resistance, targeted her directly. He was a formidable opponent, his skills honed by years of training and combat. He moved with a deadly grace, his sword a blur of motion. Cecily fought bravely, parrying his blows, countering his attacks, but she was no match for his superior skill. He disarmed her, his sword point pressing against her throat. "The lioness falls," he sneered, his voice cold and cruel. "And with you, Ravensshire falls." Nicholas, seeing Cecily in imminent danger, roared in fury. He charged forward, ignoring his wounds, his pain, his exhaustion. He launched himself at the serpent's fang, his sword aimed at the attacker's heart. The serpent's fang, surprised by Nicholas's sudden attack, turned to defend himself. But he was too slow. Nicholas's sword pierced his armor, finding its mark. The serpent's fang gasped, his eyes widening in disbelief, and he crumpled to the ground, dead. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader fall, lost their nerve. They broke and fled, disappearing into the night, leaving behind the bodies of their fallen comrades. The battle was over, but the cost was high. Many of Ravenshire's defenders had been killed or wounded. The castle had been damaged, its walls scarred by fire and steel. But Ravensshire had survived, its spirit unbroken, its people united in their determination to resist the order of the serpent. Cecily, though shaken and bruised, was unharmed. She rushed to Nicholas's side, her heart filled with fear and relief. She tended to his wounds, her hands trembling, her tears falling on his face. Nicholas, though weakened by his injuries, smiled at her, his eyes filled with love and admiration. "You fought bravely, my lioness," he said, his voice weak, but filled with pride. The clash of shadows had been a brutal test of their strength, their courage, their love. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but they knew that the war was far from over. The Order of the Serpent was still out there, plotting its revenge, waiting for its chance to strike again. But they would be ready. They would continue to fight, to defend their home, to protect their people, to build a future free from fear and oppression. They were the knight and the lioness, and together, they were unstoppable. Chapter 17. The Heart's Reckoning. The aftermath of the battle left Ravensshire scarred but not broken. The community rallied together, tending to the wounded, burying the dead, and repairing the damage to the castle. Cecily and Nicholas, though exhausted and injured, worked tirelessly to restore order and to reassure their people. Nicholas's leg wound, though serious, was not life-threatening. Cecily, with her knowledge of herbs and remedies, and with Alara's help, who arrived soon after the battle, nursed him back to health. But the injury left him with a limp, a permanent reminder of the battle and the sacrifices they had made. The death of the serpent's fang, while a significant victory, did not eliminate the threat of the Order of the Serpent. Cecily knew that they would regroup, that they would seek revenge, that they would continue to plot against Ravensshire. She intensified her efforts to gather intelligence, to identify and neutralize the remaining members of the Order. She expanded her network of informants, reaching out to contacts in other regions, even within the royal court. She learned that the Order of the Serpent was more widespread than she had imagined, that its influence extended far beyond the borders of her own kingdom. She discovered that the Order had cells in several major cities, that it was involved in a variety of illicit activities, from smuggling and extortion to political assassination and even treason. She also learned that the Order was planning a major offensive, a coordinated attack on several key targets, including Ravensshire and the royal court. Cecily realized that she could not fight this threat alone. She needed allies, she needed support, she needed to unite the forces of good against the forces of darkness. She sent messages to trusted nobles, to former allies of Nicholas, to anyone who might be willing to stand with her against the Order of the Serpent. The response was slow, hesitant. Many were afraid, unwilling to risk their lives and their fortunes in a fight against such a powerful and secretive organization. But some, inspired by Cecily's courage and Nicholas's reputation, answered her call. A council was formed, a coalition of nobles, knights, and commoners, united in their determination to defeat the Order of the Serpent. They gathered at Ravensshire, planning their strategy, coordinating their forces, preparing for the coming war. But amidst the preparations for war, Cecily and Nicholas faced a personal reckoning. The years of struggle, of exile, of constant threat had taken their toll. They had found love and companionship in each other's arms, but they had also faced loss, fear, and uncertainty. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the rebuilt main hall, Nicholas spoke of his doubts, his fears, his regrets. "I have brought you nothing but trouble, Cecily," he said, his voice filled with sadness. "I have dragged you into this fight. I have put your life in danger. I have taken you away from the life you were meant to live." Cecily looked at him, her eyes filled with love and understanding. "You have given me everything, Nicholas," she said softly. "You have given me strength. You have given me courage. You have given me a love I never thought I would find. I would not trade this life for anything." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "But I am a broken man, Cecily," he said. "I am no longer the knight I once was. I cannot protect you as I should." She squeezed his hand, her eyes meeting his. "You are the strongest man I know, Nicholas," she said. "And you protect me in ways you do not even realize. You protect my heart. You protect my spirit. You protect my hope." They embraced, their love a beacon of light in the darkness that surrounded them. They had faced their inner demons, their doubts and fears, and their love had emerged stronger, deeper, more resilient. The heart's reckoning had been a painful but necessary process, a stripping away of illusions, a confrontation with reality, a reaffirmation of their commitment to each other. They were ready, now, to face whatever the future held, to fight for their love, for their home, for their kingdom. They were the knight and the lioness, and their hearts were one. Chapter 18. A Vow Forged in Flames. The final confrontation with the Order of the Serpent was not a single, decisive battle, but a series of skirmishes, raids, and counterattacks, a protracted struggle that tested the strength and resilience of Ravenhire and its allies. Cecily and Nicholas, leading their forces, fought with courage and determination, slowly pushing back the forces of darkness, dismantling the Order's network, neutralizing its leaders. The intelligence Cecily had gathered proved invaluable, allowing them to anticipate the Order's moves, to disrupt their plans, to strike at their weak points. Nicholas's military expertise, combined with Cecily's strategic insights, proved to be a formidable combination. They discovered that the Order of the Serpent was not just a criminal organization, it was a cult, with a twisted ideology that glorified chaos and destruction. Its members were fanatics, driven by a blind faith in their cause, willing to sacrifice their lives for their twisted beliefs. The final battle took place at the ruins of an ancient fortress, a place where the Order had established its stronghold. It was a brutal and bloody conflict, a desperate struggle for survival. Cecily and Nicholas, fighting side by side, led their forces into the heart of the enemy's lair. They faced fierce resistance, the Order's members fighting with a fanatical zeal, their ranks bolstered by mercenaries and other unsavory characters. But Ravenshire's forces, inspired by Cecily's leadership and Nicholas's courage, fought with a righteous fury, their determination fueled by their love for their home, their families, their freedom. The battle raged for hours, the outcome uncertain. But slowly, gradually, Ravenshire's forces gained the upper hand. They pushed back the enemy, driving them from their defenses, forcing them to retreat. Nicholas, despite his limp, fought with the strength and skill of his younger days. He cut down one opponent after another, his sword a blur of motion, his courage unwavering. Cecily, armed with a sword and a shield, fought alongside him, her movements swift and precise, her determination fierce. She had become a warrior, a leader, a force to be reckoned with. They finally confronted the leader of the Order, a mysterious figure known only as the Grand Master, a man shrouded in darkness, his face hidden by a mask. The Grand Master was a skilled fighter, his movements fluid and deadly, his weapon a poisoned blade. Nicholas engaged the Grand Master in a duel, their swords clashing in a shower of sparks. It was a fierce and brutal fight, a test of skill and endurance. Nicholas, despite his injury, fought with a desperate courage, his love for Cecily fueling his strength. But the Grand Master's poisoned blade found its mark, grazing Nicholas's arm. The poison began to spread, weakening him, clouding his vision. Cecily, seeing Nicholas falter, cried out in alarm. She rushed to his side, but the Grand Master, seizing the opportunity, lunged at her, his blade aimed at her heart. Nicholas, with a final surge of strength, threw himself in front of Cecily, taking the blow that was meant for her. The Grand Master's blade pierced his armor, sinking deep into his chest. Nicholas gasped, his eyes widening in pain and shock. He crumpled to the ground, his body trembling. Cecily screamed, her heart shattering into 1,000,000 pieces. She knelt beside Nicholas, cradling his head in her lap, her tears falling on his face. "Nicholas,"
she cried. "No."
"Please, no." He looked at her, his eyes filled with love and regret. "I love you, Cecily," he whispered, his voice weak and fading. Always his eyes closed, his breath stopped, his body went limp. He was gone. Cecily, overwhelmed by grief and rage, let out a primal scream, a sound of utter despair and fury. She picked up Nicholas's sword, her hands trembling, her heart filled with a burning desire for vengeance. She charged at the Grand Master, her movements fueled by a raw, animalistic rage. She fought with a ferocity she had never known she possessed, her grief and anger transforming her into an avenging angel. The Grand Master, surprised by her sudden attack, tried to defend himself, but he was no match for her fury. Cecily's sword found its mark, piercing his heart. He gasped, his eyes widening in disbelief, and he fell to the ground, dead. The remaining members of the order, seeing their leader fall, lost their nerve. They broke and fled, disappearing into the darkness. The battle was over. The Order of the Serpent had been defeated. But the victory was bittersweet, bought at a terrible price. Nicholas, the knight who had saved her, who had loved her, who had fought beside her, was dead. Cecily, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen, knelt beside Nicholas, her heart broken, her spirit crushed. She had won the war, but she had lost everything that mattered. But even in her grief, she knew that she could not give up. She had a duty to her people, to Ravensshire, to Nicholas's memory. She would rebuild, she would continue to fight, she would create a world worthy of the sacrifice he had made. She looked up at the sky, the dawn breaking, casting a golden glow over the battlefield. She made a vow forged in flames, a vow to honor Nicholas's memory, to continue his legacy, to build a future of peace and justice. She was the lioness of Ravensshire, and she would not falter. She would rise from the ashes stronger, more determined, more resolute than ever before. She would carry Nicholas's love in her heart, his courage in her soul, his memory in her every action. Chapter 19. The Serpent's Demise. The death of Nicholas cast a long shadow over Ravensshire, but Cecily refused to let grief consume her. She knew that Nicholas would have wanted her to be strong, to continue the fight, to build the future they had dreamed of together. She channeled her sorrow into action, becoming an even more resolute and determined leader. The remaining members of the Order of the Serpent, scattered and demoralized by the death of their Grand Master, were hunted down and brought to justice. Cecily, with the help of her allies and her network of informants, ensured that the order was eradicated, its poisonous influence purged from the land. She oversaw the rebuilding of Ravensshire, transforming it not just into a center of commerce and learning, but also into a fortress, a symbol of resistance against tyranny and oppression. She strengthened its defenses, trained its militia, and established alliances with neighboring realms, ensuring that Ravensshire would never again be vulnerable to attack. She also implemented sweeping reforms, ensuring that justice was served fairly and equitably, that the rights of the common people were protected, that the kingdom was governed with wisdom and compassion. She became known not just as the Lioness of Ravensshire, but as a just and benevolent ruler, a leader who cared for her people, a queen in all but name. But her personal grief remained, a constant ache in her heart. She visited Nicholas's tomb every day, a simple stone marker in the chapel they had built together in the Valley of Avalon. She would speak to him, sharing her thoughts, her fears, her hopes, her dreams. She felt his presence there, a comforting warmth, a guiding light, a reminder of the love they had shared. One day, while visiting the tomb, she discovered a small, wooden box hidden beneath the stone marker. It was a box Nicholas had carved himself, its surface adorned with intricate patterns of falcons and doves. Inside, she found a letter, written in Nicholas's familiar hand. "My dearest Cecily," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. I know that my death will bring you great sorrow, but I beg you, do not despair. Remember the love we shared, the dreams we forged, the future we envisioned. Remember that I died protecting you, protecting our home, protecting the values we held dear. I have lived a life filled with both joy and sorrow, with triumph and defeat. But my greatest joy, my greatest triumph, was finding you. You taught me the true meaning of love, the true meaning of courage, the true meaning of life. Do not mourn for me, my love. Instead, live for me. Live for us. Build the future we dreamed of, a future of peace and justice, a future where love conquers all. Remember me not as a knight, not as a warrior, but as a man who loved you with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his being. And know this, my Cecily, my lioness, my love. Even in death, I will always be with you. My spirit will guide you, my love will protect you, my memory will inspire you. Yours eternally." Nicholas. Cecily read the letter with tears streaming down her face. It was a final gift from Nicholas, a message of love and hope, a reminder of his enduring presence in her life. She clutched the letter to her heart, feeling his love surround her, his spirit guide her, his memory inspire her. She knew, then, that she was not alone. Nicholas was with her always. His love was a beacon, guiding her through the darkness, giving her strength, giving her courage, giving her hope. She returned to Raven's Hire, renewed in her purpose, strengthened in her resolve. She would honor Nicholas's memory, she would fulfill his dreams, she would build the future they had envisioned together. The serpent's demise was complete, its power broken, its influence eradicated. But its legacy lived on, not in the form of fear and oppression, but in the form of courage and resilience, in the form of a lioness who had risen from the ashes, who had fought for justice, who had loved and lost, but who had never given up hope. Cecily, with Nicholas's letter clutched in her hand, looked out over her thriving land. She smiled. It wasn't the end, but a new beginning. Chapter 20. The Dawn of Raven's Hire. Years passed, and Raven's Hire flourished under Cecily's wise and compassionate rule. The scars of the past, though still visible, faded with time, replaced by a sense of peace, prosperity, and unity. The castle, once a crumbling ruin, was now a vibrant hub of activity, a testament to Cecily's vision and determination. She established a council of advisors, drawn from all walks of life, ensuring that the voices of the people were heard, that decisions were made for the benefit of all. She fostered trade and agriculture, creating a thriving economy that benefited everyone, not just the wealthy elite. She promoted education and the arts, nurturing culture of learning and creativity. Raven Hire became known throughout the land as a model of just and enlightened governance, a beacon of hope in a world often plagued by conflict and oppression. People came from far and wide to seek refuge within its walls, to experience its peace, to learn from its example. Cecily, though she never remarried, did not live a solitary life. She was surrounded by loyal friends, trusted advisors, and a community that loved and respected her. She found solace in her work, in her commitment to her people, in her dedication to building a better future. She never forgot Nicholas, his memory a constant presence in her life. She kept his letter, his signet ring, and the small wooden box he had carved, treasured reminders of the love they had shared, the sacrifices they had made, the dreams they had forged together. She often visited the Valley of Avalon, the place where they had found sanctuary, where they had built their chapel, where Nicholas was buried. She would sit by his tomb, talking to him, sharing her thoughts, her hopes, her dreams. She felt his presence there, a comforting warmth, a guiding light, a reminder that she was not alone. One day, while visiting the valley, she encountered a young woman, a traveler from a distant land. The woman was a scholar, seeking knowledge, seeking wisdom, seeking inspiration. She had heard tales of Ravensshire, of its just and compassionate ruler, of the lioness who had risen from the ashes. Cecily welcomed the young woman, sharing her story, her experiences, her vision for the future. She spoke of Nicholas, of his courage, his honor, his love. She spoke of the struggles they had faced, the battles they had fought, the sacrifices they had made. The young woman listened intently, her eyes filled with admiration and respect. She saw in Cecily a model of leadership, a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of resilience and determination. "You have built a remarkable kingdom, Lady Cecily," the young woman said. "A kingdom founded on justice, compassion, and love. You have shown the world that it is possible to overcome adversity, to create a better future, to rise above the darkness." Cecily smiled, her heart filled with a sense of peace and fulfillment.
"It was not I alone," she said.
"It was the work of many hands, many hearts, many souls. It was the legacy of a knight who loved me, who fought for me, who gave his life for me." She looked out over the valley, the sun setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. She felt a sense of completion, a sense of gratitude, a sense of hope. The dawn of Ravensshire had arrived, a new era of peace and prosperity, a testament to the enduring power of love, courage, and resilience. She had fulfilled her vow, she had honored Nicholas's memory, she had built the future they had dreamed of together. She was the lioness of Ravensshire, and her reign would be remembered for generations to come, a legend whispered on the wind, a story told around the fires, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. As the stars came out, Cecily knew her work was done. Epilogue. The seasons turned, the years flowed by, and Cecily, the lioness of Ravensshire, grew old. Her hair, once the color of ravens' wings, turned silver, her skin wrinkled, her steps slowed. But her eyes, those deep, unsettling blue eyes, still held the same wisdom, the same strength, the same unwavering spirit. She had ruled Ravensshire with justice and compassion for decades, transforming it from a desolate ruin into a thriving kingdom, a beacon of hope in a turbulent world. She had never forgotten Nicholas, his memory a constant presence in her life, his love a guiding light, his sacrifice an inspiration. She had raised no children of her own, but she had mentored countless young people, guiding them, teaching them, shaping them into future leaders. She had become a mother figure to her entire kingdom, her wisdom and compassion touching the lives of generations. As her strength began to fade, she knew that her time was drawing near. She gathered her council, her advisors, her friends, her people, to bid them farewell. She spoke of her life, her struggles, her triumphs, her regrets. She spoke of Nicholas, of his love, his courage, his sacrifice. She urged them to continue the work she had begun, to uphold the values she had championed, to build a future of peace and justice for all. She reminded them that true strength lay not in power or wealth, but in compassion, in courage, in resilience, in love. She appointed her successor, a young woman she had mentored for years, a woman who possessed the same wisdom, the same strength, the same unwavering spirit. She knew that Ravensshire would be in good hands, that her legacy would continue, that the future she had dreamed of would be realized. On a clear, crisp autumn evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the land she loved, Cecily, the lioness of Ravensshire, breathed her last. She died peacefully, surrounded by those who loved and respected her heart filled with peace, her spirit free. She was buried beside Nicholas, in the small chapel in the Valley of Avalon, the place where they had found sanctuary, where they had built their dreams, where their love had blossomed. Their tombstones, simple stone markers, stood side by side, a testament to their enduring love, their unwavering commitment, their shared sacrifice. The people of Ravensshire mourned her passing, but they also celebrated her life, her legacy, her remarkable reign. They remembered her as a just and compassionate ruler, a wise and courageous leader, a lioness who had risen from the ashes to build a better world. Her story became a legend, whispered on the wind, told around the fires, passed down from generation to generation. The legend of the lioness of Ravensshire and the knight who had loved her, who had fought for her, who had given his life for her. A legend of love, courage, resilience, and hope. A legend that would endure forever, a testament to the power of tea.